I watched from the bridal suite window as guests filled the garden chairs below, their pastel dresses and navy suits creating a watercolor scene against the manicured lawns of my parents' Connecticut estate. Everything was perfect. The white roses I'd insisted on, the string quartet playing Pachelbel, the champagne fountain that cost more than most people's cars. Everything except the knot in my stomach that had been growing tighter since this morning. "Sarah, darling, you look radiant," my mother said, adjusting the cathedral veil that had belonged to my grandmother and her grandmother before that. 4 generations of Whitman brides had worn this lace, each marrying the right sort of man from the right sort of family, till now. I caught my reflection in the antique mirror. Blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, pearls at my throat, the very picture of old money refinement. But my eyes gave me away. They held the same worry I'd been carrying for months, the same question that kept me awake at night. Was I making the biggest mistake of my life? Or was I finally doing something right? "Has anyone seen Diego?" I asked, trying to sound casual. My bridesmaids, all sorority sisters from Yale, exchanged glances. They'd been supportive when I first brought him home junior year, charmed by his accent and dark eyes, intrigued by the novelty of dating someone so different. But as graduation approached and wedding plans began, I noticed their enthusiasm cooling. Subtle comments about cultural differences and long-term compatibility crept into conversations. "I'm sure he's with the groomsmen," my maid of honor Charlotte said diplomatically, but I caught the look she shared with my mother, a look that said everything they couldn't voice aloud. Diego Martinez wasn't supposed to happen to me. I was supposed to marry someone like James Pemberton, whose family had a box at the Met and whose trust fund could buy a small country, someone whose grandmother played bridge with my grandmother, whose family tree could be traced back to the Mayflower. Instead, I fell for a boy whose parents cleaned office buildings at night to pay for his education, whose grandmother spoke only Spanish, and whose idea of fine dining was the taco truck outside our dorm. But God, I loved him. I loved how he made me laugh until my sides hurt, how he saw through all the pretense that suffocated my world, how he challenged me to think beyond the narrow confines of my upbringing. When he looked at me, I wasn't just the Whitman heir or the debutante of the year. I was Sarah, just Sarah, and that felt revolutionary. The first time I brought him home for dinner, the silence was deafening. My father carved the prime rib with surgical precision, while my mother made polite inquiries about Diego's background. They spoke about him as if he were a foreign species they were trying to classify. When Diego mentioned his father's construction work, you could practically hear the collective intake of breath around the table. "How industrious," my mother had said, the word dripping with condescension wrapped in politeness. But Diego was brilliant. Scholarship to Yale, double major in engineering and business, already fielding job offers from Fortune 500 companies. He was everything my parents claimed to value. Hardworking, intelligent, ambitious. Yet somehow it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. A soft knock interrupted my reverie. "Come in," I called. My father entered, looking distinguished in his tailcoat, his silver hair perfectly styled. Thomas Whitman III was a man accustomed to getting his way, whether in boardrooms or family dinners. He'd built an empire on that certainty, that unwavering belief that he knew what was best. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Are you ready for this?" It was such a simple question, but loaded with subtext. Was I ready to join my life to someone they barely tolerated? Was I ready to disappoint them publicly, in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle? Was I ready to choose love over loyalty? "I think so," I whispered. He nodded slowly, then moved to the window where I'd been watching the guests arrive. "You know, Sarah, marriage is about more than feelings. It's about partnership, about building a life that makes sense. About," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "about making choices that honor your family's legacy." There it was, the gentle but unmistakable pressure I'd felt for months. The suggestion that by marrying Diego, I was somehow betraying everything the Whitman name represented. "I love him, Dad." "I know you think you do," he said softly. "But love isn't always enough." The words hung in the air like a threat, a final warning before I walked down that aisle and changed everything forever. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare disguised as celebration. My parents had chosen the country club, of course. Neutral territory where they could control the narrative. Diego's family looked magnificent, but out of place among the oil paintings and crystal chandeliers, like beautiful birds in a gilded cage. I'd watched my future mother-in-law, Maria, try to navigate the maze of forks and wine glasses while my mother's friends whispered behind their hands. Carmen Martinez was one of the strongest women I'd ever met. She'd raised 4 children while working 2 jobs and going to night school for her nursing degree. But in that dining room, surrounded by people who'd inherited their wealth rather than earned it, she seemed to shrink into herself. Diego's father, Roberto, had calloused hands from 30 years in construction, hands that had built homes and fed his family through sheer determination. Those same hands seemed to embarrass him as he reached for his water glass, and I wanted to scream at everyone in the room that this man had more integrity in his pinky finger than most of them had in their entire bodies. But the worst part was Diego himself. I could see him trying so hard to fit in, softening his accent, laughing at my uncle's borderline racist jokes, pretending not to notice when people spoke to him slowly, as if he might not understand English. My brilliant, proud, wonderful Diego, diminishing himself to make others comfortable. That's when I knew my parents' strategy. They weren't going to forbid the marriage. That would make them look like the villains. Instead, they were going to slowly suffocate him with politeness, death by 1,000 cuts of condescension, until he either broke or left. "Sarah, you're being awfully quiet," my Aunt Priscilla observed during the salad course. "Pre-wedding jitters? Just taking it all in," I replied, forcing a smile. "Well, you certainly know how to surprise us," she continued with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "We never expected you to go so international." And Diego's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. I also caught my mother's warning glance at her sister, a look that said, "Not here, not now." After dinner, as guests mingled on the terrace with their brandy and cigars, I found myself cornered by a circle of family friends, the same women who'd watched me grow up, who'd attended every debutante ball and charity luncheon, who considered themselves my surrogate aunts. "He's very handsome," Mrs. Pemberton said with a smile that didn't fool anyone. "Such lovely coloring. And that accent," added Mrs. Crawford. "So exotic." "Where exactly did you say his family was from?" "Mexico," I said firmly. "His grandparents immigrated to Texas in the 1960s. "Oh, how nice," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "And what does his father do again?" They knew perfectly well what Roberto did. They'd been briefed by their daughters, who'd gotten the information from mine. This was theater, a performance designed to highlight everything that made Diego unsuitable. "He's a contractor," I said, lifting my chin. "He built the library at Diego's high school, and the community center where Diego taught math to kids who couldn't afford tutors." The women exchanged glances, their smiles growing tighter. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by one of their own. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Crawford said in the tone reserved for particularly slow children. "We're sure he's a lovely man. It's just, well, marriage is complicated enough without adding unnecessariness challenges." "What kind of challenges?" I asked, though I knew I was walking into a trap. "Cultural differences, dear. Religious differences. Social expectations. The children—" Mrs. Pemberton let the sentence hang in the air like a threat. Children. There it was. The nuclear option. The suggestion that any children Diego and I might have would be somehow lesser, caught between worlds, never fully accepted in either. Later that night, I found Diego on the dock behind the country club, staring out at the dark water. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, finally allowing himself to breathe. "Hey," I said softly, settling beside him on the wooden planks. "Hey yourself, Mrs. Martinez-to-be." But his usual playfulness was strained. "You okay?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think about what our kids will be like at these kinds of parties?" My heart broke a little. "What do you mean?" "I mean, will they be like me tonight? Trying to figure out which fork to use while people make jokes about their last name? Or will they be like you, born into all this, looking down at people like my parents? Diego, I watched your aunt ask my mother what she does for work. 3 times. As if being a registered nurse wasn't impressive enough the first time she answered. I took his hand, Those beautiful, capable hands that could fix anything, create anything, hold me like I was precious and fragile and strong all at once. My family doesn't define me, I said. Doesn't it? He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight I could see the doubt that had been growing in his eyes. Because sometimes I think I'm not marrying just you, Sarah. I'm marrying all of this. The expectations, the judgments, the constant feeling that I'm not quite good enough. You're good enough for me. Am I? Or am I just rebellion in a really expensive suit? The question hung between us like a chasm, and I realized that tomorrow's ceremony would be about more than just two people promising to love each other. It would be a choice between two worlds, two versions of who we could become together. The morning of my wedding dawned perfect and terrible, all golden sunlight and pristine blue sky, as if nature itself was mocking my inner turmoil. I'd barely slept, replaying my conversation with Diego over and over, seeing the hurt in his eyes, the growing certainty that maybe he was right. Maybe I was just rebelling against everything I'd been raised to be. My mother bustled around the bridal suite like a general preparing for battle, directing the photographer, the florist, the hair and makeup team with military precision. Everything had to be perfect for the 200 guests downstairs, for the society photographer from town and country, for the wedding video that would play at anniversary parties for decades to come. Sarah, stop fidgeting, she commanded, as the makeup artist tried to apply my lipstick for the third time. You're going to ruin everything, but I couldn't sit still. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Diego's face the night before. I saw his mother trying to navigate the minefield of my family's expectations. I saw my aunt's fake smiles and heard their coded warnings about cultural differences and social compatibility. Maybe we should postpone, I said suddenly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The entire room went silent. My mother's face went white, then red, then white again. Excuse me? I said maybe we should postpone, just until... Sarah Elizabeth Whitman. My mother's voice could have cut glass. There are 200 people downstairs, a photographer from Vogue, and enough flowers to open a florist shop. You are not postponing anything. But what if we're making a mistake? My mother dismissed the hair and makeup team with a wave of her hand, waiting until we were alone before she sat beside me on the antique settee that had been in our family for generations. Sweetheart, she said, her voice gentler, but no less firm. Everyone has last-minute doubts. It's perfectly natural. But you can't let nerves ruin the most important day of your life. What if it's not nerves? What if it's something more? She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her words carefully. My mother was many things. Controlling, traditional, sometimes insufferably elitist. But she wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what I was questioning. Sarah, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said months ago. She took my hands in hers, and for a moment, I saw past the perfect makeup and designer dress to the woman who had sung me lullabies and kissed my scraped knees. I like Diego. He's intelligent, he's kind, and it's clear he adores you. But liking someone and building a life with them are two different things. What do you mean? I mean that love is wonderful, but it's not enough to bridge every gap. You come from different worlds, darling. Different expectations, different traditions, different ideas about what marriage should be. That's not anyone's fault, but it's reality. I pulled my hands away. So you think I should call it off? I think you should be honest about what you're signing up for. This won't be easy, Sarah. There will always be people who don't understand your choice, who make things difficult. Your children will face questions you never had to face. You'll be explaining and defending and justifying for the rest of your life. Her words hit me like a physical blow because they echoed all my worst fears, but there was something else in her voice. Something that sounded almost like respect, but, she continued, if you're prepared for that, if you truly believe Diego is worth all the complications he'll bring to your life, then you have my blessing. You've always been stubborn, even as a little girl. Maybe that's exactly what you'll need. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Come in, my mother called. My father entered with Diego behind him, and my heart stopped. Diego looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair styled perfectly, his brown eyes serious and determined. But it was my father's expression that surprised me. Not the disappointment I expected, but something that might have been approval. "I think you two need to talk," my father said simply. "We'll give you some privacy." My parents left, closing the door behind them, and suddenly Diego and I were alone. He looked at me in my wedding dress, and I saw his breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said softly. "Diego, about last night." "I've been thinking," he interrupted. "About what I said, about our kids, about all of this." He gestured around the room with its silk wallpaper and crystal chandelier, and I realized I was asking the wrong question. "What do you mean?" "I was asking if I was good enough for your world. But the real question is, are we good enough for each other? Are we strong enough to build something new? Something that belongs to both of us?" He moved closer, taking my hands in his, and I felt some of the tension leave my body. "I can't promise your family will ever fully accept me," he continued, "and I can't promise mine will understand all of this either. But I can promise that I will love you, and any children we have, fiercely and completely. I can promise to build a bridge between our worlds, not by diminishing either one, but by honoring both." Tears pricked my eyes, threatening to ruin my carefully applied makeup. "What if it's not enough? Then we'll fail spectacularly," he said with that crooked smile I'd fallen in love with. "But we'll fail together." Outside, the string quartet began playing the processional music, and I could hear the rustle of guests rising to their feet. In just a few minutes, I would walk down that aisle and make a choice that would define the rest of my life. "So," Diego said, offering me his arm, "ready to shock Connecticut society? Despite everything, the doubts, the pressure, the uncertain future?" I found myself laughing. "Let's do it." The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional vows and exchanged rings, but as we moved to the reception, I noticed my parents pulling Diego aside. I watched from across the garden as my mother pressed something into his hand, while my father spoke quietly in his ear. Diego's face changed, and I knew whatever they'd given him wasn't a congratulations card. During the cocktail hour, I finally cornered him by the dessert table. "What did they give you?" He pulled out a folded piece of paper, and I scanned my mother's elegant handwriting. "Thank the Whitman family for their warm welcome. Express gratitude for this opportunity. Keep cultural references to a minimum." My blood ran cold. "They gave you a script. Your father was very clear about the expectations," Diego said quietly. "This is an important event for your family, Sarah. There will be consequences if I say the wrong thing." Before I could respond, the band leader was tapping his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the groom's toast." Diego walked to the microphone, the script in his hand. I followed, my heart pounding. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. My Yale friends, my parents' business associates, his small contingent of relatives who looked as out of place as exotic flowers in a field of daisies. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Thank you for being here to celebrate Sarah and me on this incredible day." I held my breath. The script was right there in his hands. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Before I met Sarah," he continued, setting the paper down without glancing at it, "I thought love was about finding someone who fit perfectly into your world." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother's face had gone pale. "But Sarah taught me that real love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about being brave enough to build a new life together, one that honors both of your stories." His voice grew stronger with each word. "Sarah could have chosen someone easier. Instead, she chose me. A guy whose grandmother makes the best tamales in East LA, whose father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account, but by how hard he's willing to work for the people he loves." I could see some guests shifting uncomfortably, but Diego's voice was warm, filled with genuine affection. "She chose complexity over simplicity, adventure over comfort, love over convention. And I fell in love with all of her too. The Sarah who argues with the TV during Jeopardy, who insists on reading me poetry at 2 a.m, who cries at dog videos, and donates to every charity that sends her mail." I was crying now, not caring about my makeup. "So here's my promise," Diego said, raising his champagne glass. "I promise to love her exactly as she is, in all her contradictory, brilliant glory. I promise to build a life with her that honors where we both came from while creating something entirely new. and I promise that our children will know they come from two rich traditions, two cultures that both shaped who their parents became. He looked directly at my parents. I can't promise to be the son-in-law you imagined, but I can promise to love your daughter with everything I have, and to never ask her to choose between her family and me. Because love shouldn't require that kind of sacrifice. The garden was completely silent. Then the toast that followed was thunderous, genuine, transformative. As we danced under the string lights, I realized Diego hadn't just given a wedding speech. He'd drawn a line in the sand, established boundaries, claimed his place in our story, not as a grateful outsider, but as an equal partner. That was perfect, I whispered in his ear. Even though I completely ignored your parents' script, I looked over at my mother and father. My mother caught my eye, and after a moment, raised her champagne glass in a small salute. It wasn't surrender, but it was acknowledgement. Especially because you ignored their script, I said. Ready to dance with your wife? Diego grinned. Lead the way, Mrs. Martinez. As we swayed together, surrounded by our complicated families, I realized this was just the beginning. There would be more battles ahead. But tonight we'd proven that love could be stronger than fear, that authenticity could triumph over approval. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to write together.